Welcome to the Lead Well podcast. Around here, we believe leadership shouldn't cost you your peace, your well-being, or the parts of yourself you've worked so hard to reclaim. I'm your host, Trasetta Washington, leadership wellness coach and strategist, and my mission is to give you practical, actionable steps to help you reduce overwhelm, lead more effectively, and build a sustainable rhythm for both your team and your life. Let's dive into today's conversation. Hey leaders, welcome back to the Lead Well podcast. Today we are talking about burnout, specifically how you can create burnout-proof leadership and the key to doing so. We talk a lot about burnout. I talk a lot about burnout, but I think one of the conversations that isn't had enough or rarely at all is how you actually create leadership that is burnout proof. Where does it actually start? I think most leaders think burnout is prevented or solved by simply creating some better boundaries or taking time off from work, or maybe even redistributing the workload so it's a little bit more balanced. And don't get me wrong, those things do matter, but they're not actually the starting point. Burnout-proof leadership does not begin with your team. It doesn't begin with systems. It actually begins with how you lead yourself. Let me define what self-leadership really means, right? So self-leadership is really the ability for you to stay aware of what is happening inside of you and then lead yourself with intention, especially in pressurized situations. That way you are not leading from a place of exhaustion or reactivity or just simply on autopilot. So at its core, self-leadership really means noticing what your internal state is before it starts to spill out onto your team or into your leadership. It's being able to check in with yourself and say, where am I? Kind of like how when you're in the mall and they have the maps and there's the little dot that says you are here, right? It is identifying where you are so that you can make conscious decisions, intentional decisions about how you are going to move forward. Self-leadership is also about regulating your emotions rather than reacting from that emotional state, right? It's recognizing that your emotions are there, but we're going to pause for a minute to actually respond rather than just simply having that, knee-jerk reaction to what is going on. And making decisions that align with your values, your capacity, and the season that you're in right now. Self-leadership is really how you lead yourself before you ever lead others. And whether you do it consciously or not, you are always leading yourself. I believe that self-awareness is the foundation of great leadership. I do a lot of reflection exercises with my coaching clients. And even when I'm facilitating trainings and workshops, I do a lot of reflective exercises because I believe that self-awareness really allows you to recognize stress, that you're experiencing stress before before it spills over onto other people. It allows you to catch patterns, your own patterns, instead of just constantly repeating them. When you recognize that, oh, this is a pattern of mine, you can put things into place to avoid continuing down that unhealthy pattern. And it allows you to separate the facts from just simply an emotional reaction. Without self-awareness, you will unintentionally project pressure onto those that you lead. And your decision-making is very reactionary. You're not able to be strategic and intentional with your decision making. Here's a little nugget for you. Whatever you haven't processed as a leader, your teams are going to feel that. Your teams are going to pick up on that. Even if it's unspoken, they will feel it. There's this energy, if you will, that is present that your team will feel. They may not necessarily be able to put their finger on it or name it, but they'll recognize that something is not right? Something is off. Without self-awareness and self-leadership, it is easy for you to lose yourself inside of your leadership role. Now, most leaders don't choose to disconnect from themselves. It happens because of role creep. They start taking on more and more responsibilities, and which leads to, wearing too many hats, taking on too much, and then being rewarded for their ability to endure, their ability to be resilient, their ability to push through, instead of being rewarded for being in alignment. There is this pressure that we place on ourselves based on the things that we are rewarded for and celebrated for. We start to see that, people rely on us. So they're like, they need me. So I've got to keep pushing forward because it makes us feel good about ourselves. And you tell yourself that, hey, I can handle it. I'm strong. I'm the strong one. I can handle it. But over time, what happens is your role becomes louder than you on the inside, your own voice on the inside. And when you ignore your own internal state, that's when stress starts to rise. And as stress rises, your irritability also rises. And that has a negative impact on your clarity, right? You're not able to be as clear because you are in this emotional, stressful, irritable state. And this doesn't happen suddenly. It's not burnout doesn't just, hello, I'm here, announce itself. It is something that builds quietly over time. And it happens because we're in this place where we're dealing with, urgency, just constant urgency. Everything is urgent. Everything needs to be done right now. Everything feels like a priority. And so we keep doing all the things and we suppress all of the emotions that are going on the inside of us. And because of that, because we override that, we end up just wearing ourselves down until we get to the place where burnout is inevitable. Now, I have to make this point. Burnout is not a failure of your ability to be resilient, right? It's not because you're not resilient. It's because you have been neglecting self-leadership. I want to share a little snippet of part of my own story and why I teach my clients to first work on their identity and lead themselves to lean into self-leadership, because I found myself in a position, in a role where I was working ridiculous hours and I was stressed out. I was so engrossed in the role that I had, the position that I held, that I allowed myself to be taken advantage of, because people came to me for everything. And that made me feel good. It felt good to be needed. It felt good to be relied on. And so I positioned myself more and more to be the person that everyone relied on. And in doing so, I found myself in this place where I completely lost who I was. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't just do that at work. I did that in other aspects of my life as well. And I remember being at a business retreat in Jamaica, standing on the beach, reflecting on my life and where I was right then. And I realized, I was like, I don't even know who I am anymore, because I had shifted, changed, and transformed myself to align with what I thought each of the different roles that I played in life expected of me. And so my leadership role, I felt expected me to work long hours, expected me to sacrifice, expected me to do all the things and allow my role, the scope of my role to creep into areas that really weren't mine to carry. And I vowed right there on that beach that I would return to me. And that is where this concept of burnout-proof leadership was really birthed. And burnout-proof leadership really it's not about doing less, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm really talking about leading from having a regulated nervous system. I was stuck in fight or flight mode, or freeze mode, really, for years and didn't even realize it. So what I teach around burnout proof leadership is learning how to first regulate your nervous system, because that is when you're able to make decisions from a place of clarity rather than pressure or being depleted. In order for you to have sustainable leadership, you have to have that internal awareness. It also requires you to have emotional steadiness, and that can't happen without your ability to honestly self-assess. If you can't honestly reflect and self-assess where you are, what's going on within you, it's going to be very difficult for you to, one, be steady, but it's going to be difficult for you to truly create sustainable burnout-proof leadership. And I got to say this, you cannot out-strategize a dysregulated nervous system. I don't care how many strategies, hacks, techniques you come up with, you cannot out-strategize a dysregulated nervous system. And there's too many leaders who are trying to pour into their teams when they themselves have nothing in their cup to give. You've heard that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. It is so true. But we feel like we have to pour into other people, and then once we are empty, then okay, well, we'll go refill. But the truth of the matter is, I like to use the analogy of having like the old school teacups with the saucer, right? We're having high tea, right? And self-leadership, which is aligned with self-care, right, is about allowing yourself to be poured into first. And you pour into yourself enough that your teacup overflows into the saucer. What happens is you give to everyone else out of the saucer's portion rather than out of your portion in the teacup. That way you are never depleted, right? But most leaders try and do the opposite. When you do that, when you pour out of your own portion, when you pour out of your own reserves and you deplete yourself, that turns into resentment. Not only that, you're going to exhaust yourself. You're going to completely deplete yourself. And the way that you treat yourself is the thing that sets the ceiling for how you're going to lead others. This is why I place so much emphasis on self-leadership and internal capacity. Now, don't get me wrong, I recognize leadership is emotionally draining. It is. There's no there's no way there's no way around that. However, when you take the time to regulate your nervous system, that allows you to take that pause before you react to something, right? You can pause, think about it, and be intentional about whatever action you take afterwards instead of just being reactionary, right? It allows you to hold that discomfort, that tension, without escalating it, without taking it to another level. And what you do is you model what it means to be steady under pressure. You model that for your teams. Now, nervous system regulation, that type of leadership is invisible, right? Your teams may not necessarily, they're not going to see that. But at the same time, they feel it. They are going to feel it. Your team doesn't just follow your direction. They respond to your internal state as a leader. Think about it this way. Have you ever had a manager or leader or even a coworker who was very dysregulated, right? They when you were around them, you never knew what kind of mood they were going to be in. And so you would kind of walk on eggshells until you would figure out what their mood for the day was so that you would know how to interact with them. That is, if it's a colleague, that's a little bit easier to navigate. But when it is your manager, when it's you as a leader, your team mirrors you. You're the one that sets the tone. I say it all the time. Leaders go first, right? You're the one that sets the tone. And if you are coming in dysregulated every single day or the majority of the time, your team is now operating from that same state. So what does it look like? What does it look like to lead yourself? What does it look like to practice self-leadership? Well, first, you've got to check in with yourself regularly. Identify where it is that you are nearing your capacity so that you can figure out how to adjust for that. And you want to adjust before the breakdown occurs. You don't want to wait until you're depleted or things break down to make an adjustment. No, if you can figure out where, oh my gosh, I'm getting close to my capacity. What do I need to adjust here so that I don't stretch beyond it? Right? When you do this, leadership becomes much more intentional and less reactive. Now, we're not striving for perfection here. I don't believe in perfection, right? That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is you being present in your body, present in your environment, so that you can recognize what is truly happening and adjust for that. When you are able to lead yourself well, you create an environment where your team experiences more trust, which provides greater psychological safety for them, which leads to clearer communication. Right? Trust is a foundation of that. And that building trust within your team begins with you leading yourself well. Because what happens is you create a space where your team members have permission for honesty. They have permission to rest and adjust. They have permission to create sustainability in their own work environment, their own performance. And the culture of your team or your organization shifts because your leadership does. And this isn't just beneficial to you or your team, this is beneficial to the entire organization. Because when you create this type of culture or environment for your teams, it can reduce burnout, and which can also reduce turnover. It's going to help increase employee engagement and retention. You're going to create an environment where people are better able to collaborate with one another and make better decisions. So, self leadership is actually very strategic. It's not some abstract concept out there, it really is a leadership strategy. Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought, if you will. Burnout proof leadership doesn't begin with fixing your team, adjusting your organizational chart, or adding another initiative. It begins with how you relate to yourself, especially when you are under pressure. When you as a leader lack self-awareness, emotional regulation, and internal clarity, there is no strategy that can compensate for that. But when you are grounded, self-led, and regulated, everything works better. The communication, decision-making, the culture, performance, all those things work better. This is why the work of self-leadership cannot stay abstract. It has to become real life. It has to become tangible. In my workshops, keynotes, and trainings, I work with organizations to help leaders to reconnect with themselves, all while they strengthen their emotional intelligence and create teams that are able to perform without breaking down. Now, if your organization is ready to move beyond burnout conversations and into sustainable leadership practices, I would love to support that work. You can learn more about how to bring me in to work with your organization, or submit a speaking or facilitation inquiry using the link that's inside of my show notes. Let's have a conversation, because burnout-proof leadership doesn't start with doing more. It truly starts with leading yourself and leading yourself well. So until next time, lead well so you can live well.